And so Joseph knew about this. Brigham Young was of the Scottish Rites, didn't know anything, clueless. And so he took all of his Scottish Rites followers, the Danites, and were clueless as to the true Egyptian understanding. So when David O. McKay gets the papyri back from the Metropolitan Museum, he's clueless. He doesn't know how to translate. He's not a translator. He's a false prophet. So he gives it to Hugh Nibley, and Hugh Nibley doesn't really know any Egyptian. He just pretends to be, as he's in that office, took a little bit of knowledge, and yeah, they had to give it to scholars of the world, and the scholars of the world say, no, Joseph Smith was wrong. We can't find the name, the Hebrew name, Abraham, anywhere in these Egyptian texts. And Mormons are clueless as to any of that. And so then it takes me to come along and say, no. Egyptologists and Mormons are all wrong. You have to translate the facsimiles, the petroglyphs. Egyptologists are not doing that, first of all. And then second of all, yes, Abraham is a Hebrew, and it's not transliterated from Egyptian. It's the symbolism, just like the Bible, where I told you that Abel is Osiris, Canaan is Seth, and Adam is Geb, and God is Shu. That's how it works with the translation from Egyptian. And Egyptologists all missed it. D.M. Murdoch, the late D.M. Murdoch, is the one who figured it out for the New Testament, but she couldn't formulate it into a workable theory other than she recognized that the stories were from Egyptian. If you watch the movie Zeitgeist, the religious section on the first one, they merge Osiris and Horus together as one entity. No, they're wrong on that. Gotta separate them. And what needs to happen is she needed to identify that the New Testament Gospels were a merging of the two stories, and she died before formulating a theory and working on it. Gary Greenberg also figured it out for the Torah, his 101 Myths of the Bible. He got the idea. He recognized stories, but as you notice, his theory gets weaker after the first several. After Noah, he can't figure it out after Noah, as he's stretching to come up with 101. And he even makes a mistake with the naming of the children of Noah, considering Ta as one of them. Though yeah, Japheth does come from Ta, but it's Yah-Ta, as intended in Hebrew. Am I the one who... Anyway. And so, because Gary Greenberg is... I think he's dead. He's not responding to me anymore. They did put out a book after I sent him an email, but it may be his estate that was doing it. I don't know if I put it up here. I'm not finding it right away. But yeah, I bought the book that was brought to my attention after I tried emailing him. But yeah, he's not pursuing his original attempt at making a theory. And of course people ridicule him because he was using common knowledge of Egyptian, and people wanted references. So he didn't provide references, which caused much confusion and allowed Christians to attack him, whereas Christian attacks on Dion Murdoch were different. And so it was up to me, as I was another scholar during that time frame, and had first established the decipherment of Paleo-Hebrew, and then went on to recognize that the Bible stories contained Egyptian information. And so when I found Gary Greenberg's 101 Myths, I then went, oh, got it, and figured out what Gary Greenberg was missing. And with the missing parts filled in, I then went, oh, that's how Joseph did it. So Osiris, in facsimile number 1, for example, is Abraham under a particular story that you're wanting to tell. And there's different levels of translation within Egyptian, but then you can also add one for other cultures who want to ascribe the stories from Egyptian to their characters. And so that's what it was with the Jews, is the Jews wanted to attach their ancestral heritage to the Egyptians, but the Jew was post-captivity Jew, and so he was more prone to favor the Mesopotamians, and thus why Abraham came from Ur of Chaldea in Babylon is because of their captivity, rather than trusting and breaking off, as Daniel tried to teach the Jews. Don't fall for the Babylonians, don't fall for their culture, don't fall for their gods, stay away from the Jewish culture, or the Babylonian culture. Unfortunately, the author of the Torah did not listen to the author of the book of Daniel, and so that's why Babylonian influencing permeates the Torah when he is using the Egyptian records to tell the story. And so Abraham, when he's sacrificing Isaac then becomes Osiris. And so you can see how you can use facsimile number 1 to tell different biblical stories using biblical characters, depending on how you want the story to go. That's how the Torah was written. But the Egyptian stories are the correct documents for the basis of all religion. And thus Ezekiel 37, as you Mormons know, the stick of Joseph is to merge with the stick of Judah, correcting the stick of Judah. And what does the Book of Mormon tell us is the stick of Joseph? It's from the Egyptian records. And the brass plates in the Book of Mormon is that merging of the stick of Joseph with the stick of Judah. How do I know that? Because the Book of Mormon says so. It's the record of the kings of Judah and also the genealogy of Joseph. The merging of the two into one book. And then it has, the brass plates has the Torah in it, as it talks about. And so, yes, this is what the Jews are looking for, is the last days Messiah, who will correct and answer all the Jewish questions from the confusion in the Torah. Is someone who can do that. And so yes, it's all available in the Egyptian records, as Joseph Smith named the papyra the book of Abraham and the book of Joseph. He never got around to the book of Joseph translation, which was given to was it Oliver Cowdery? And Oliver Cowdery couldn't do it, but he did talk about some things. Oh, this looks like Eve talking with the serpent. Because I'd show you, but I am going to break this video up into segments, I guess, now that we're an hour long. But and so you can see that Oliver Cowdery was doing that same thing that Joseph was doing, is that they were trying to correct the Torah with the Egyptian papyra. That was their intention. So that's why you'll notice Joseph in the explanations of the facsimiles, specifically number 2, where he says it represents this as also this. He's recognizing that there are multiple levels of translation of these Egyptian glyphs, as I came to understand. And so when I figured it out, that there are multiple translations, thanks to my Paleo-Hebrew, which is not Semitic, it comes from the Egyptian. So it's more of an Egyptian alphabet. Excuse me. Just like the Paleo-Greek. Both from the core language. So it's post-captivity Hebrew that becomes Semitic. But before the Babylonian conquering, Paleo-Hebrew was a different language altogether. And that's how I figured it out, because Paleo-Hebrew then had multiple layers of meaning depending on vowels that were used, as I found out with the Greeks. So yes, I've also been trying to work on the Paleo-Greek language as well. But that's the language I used to test my Hebrew theory, Paleo-Hebrew theory, was devoweling of the both dictionaries. I've got the Paleo-Hebrew one published, though my font that I originally used never made it back to me, and so it messed up in the production, so I had to put a key at the beginning. So sorry for those of you who get that and find that frustrating, as I did. And so, yeah, Joseph Smith was mostly correct, but he was incomplete. He didn't translate facsimile number 3, for example. And that's where Abraham is on the throne with the female pharaoh behind him as his wife. But Joseph is telling the story that the pharaoh is not actually the father of the female pharaoh, whose son is going through for his coronation, his temple rituals, which Joseph mixes up the two characters, the waiter and the person going through for their initiations. Ma'at is the female, and the male is the Horus figure, the last days Messiah. And so when you go back into the Bible, you have Sarah, who is told to say, Abraham is my brother, which, if you understand Egyptian pharaonic lineage, each pharaoh must marry the birthright blessing sister, daughter, in order to claim legitimacy of the throne. And so Abraham is of nobility, Egyptian nobility, as the author is not wanting to tell us. And so Sarah is not lying, Abraham is not telling her to lie, because they are brother and sister. And yet they go before the current pharaoh when Abraham's supposed to be the pharaoh, isn't he? So again, we have Abraham in the role of Horus going before Seth to take back the throne, restore the throne. And you have Abraham looking in the heavens, and your seed shall be as the number of the stars in the heaven and the number of the sands on the seashore. And that's all part of Abraham to be the pharaoh, the restoring pharaoh. That's all symbolism, all types and shadows of the Osiris character and Horus character. And yet it's also connected to actual history, because which pharaoh was female? Well, there was the first one that we know of in the Old Kingdom, and then I already told you about Hatshepsut of the 18th dynasty, and thus to establish for Joseph to say that the female pharaoh is behind the throne, he's referring to the 18th dynasty. And Osiris, who's on the throne, he's calling Abraham, because the biblical account shows Abraham is not the legitimate pharaoh, but through his son, which is the son of the woman,